This is your daily dose of all things royal. This has been one crazy week, with a flood of information breaking loose. I can't help but wonder, what are they trying to distract us from? I mean, we've seen for years, the media chose not to talk about Sleazy's corrupted network and abuses that shine a light on these globalists. Now they're all over it. The sloppy, nonsensical release of over 3 million files makes me think it's all intentional. Not just to obfuscate the truth, but to keep us endlessly occupied and distracted. You must admit that there's a lot being thrown out there. Last week, it was beginning with Andrew and the newspapers being covered with those headlines. This week, we have Savannah Guthrie's mom, Nancy, going missing with a story that just doesn't add up. And then you have now this online battle with Hillary Clinton and James Comer, in where now all of a sudden the Clintons want to testify. In times like this, sometimes you just have to step back and observe what everyone's saying and truly listen. And I think we all can agree here, is that the powerful have been getting away with unimaginable evil, while the rest of us not only fund it, but suffer its consequences. All because we weren't paying attention. Think about this. What happened this week? A lot happened this week. We had hearings on the fraud. Is anybody talking about the Minnesota fraud anymore? No. We also had the Oversight Committee hearing on censorship and how the EU interfered in our free speech here in America. Is anybody talking about it? Barely anyone is. Now, yesterday, I was pleasantly surprised to see Alex Phillips from Talk TV actually address the censorship. But what I found shocking, they knew nothing about what was going on.
You probably don't know anything about this because it's not made it into the news cycle yet. In the UK, I don't know about in Europe, but it's staggering. Right, I'm actually on X right now, and I'm looking at House Judiciary GOP. Right, so this is the Republican Party in the House Judiciary for the American government, who have been asked to perform a search into the censorship of Europe of free speech. Now, we know that the Undersecretary has been asked to go back and get information and report to Trump about how bad free speech is in the UK. But looking at these files, I'm just going to read this to you. For more than a year, the committee has been warning that European censorship laws threaten US free speech online. Now we have the proof. Big tech is censoring American speech in the US, including true information, in order to comply with Europe's Digital Services Act. It goes on about all the way that they created codes and forums to pressure platforms to censor speech more and more aggressively, that the European regulators, all the communications going on with the big tech companies, the one they couldn't control, by the way, was X, right, when Elon Musk bought it. But it goes on and on. All the evidence that's been published now. And so what were they censoring speech on? So I'm going down this thread here about the community guidelines that the European Commission set up. It says, to put simply, the boundaries of debate on political topics like mass migration, men in women's sports and more are now set by community guidelines, which have to be in hoc to the demands of the EU Commission. As early as 2020, EU President Ursula von der Leyen told platforms to change their rules and take down content questioning established narratives about the COVID-19 pandemic and the vaccine.
Now, I know that people who watch this channel know that this is not new news. This has been going on. You guys understand exactly how this started, what was being done, and some of you even experienced it. But it makes you wonder how much control these platforms really have and what they choose to promote and what they choose to suppress. Now, we all know that this channel is suppressed because Meghan and Harry had something to do with it, but it goes to show the power that these people have in suppressing information that the people should absolutely know about. Now, I've said this 1,000 times over, that once you lose free speech, you lose everything else. Here's a perfect example of the dangerous line that the UK government is walking here by doing this to its own citizens. This is a doctor who lost his license to practice as a result of things that he posted on Twitter.
Obviously, I've been struck off as a doctor. for incidents not involving any patients, no negligence, no harm. It was for internet behaviours, calling out false information, calling out misinformation that was harmful, in my opinion, and making safeguarding concerns regards pregnancy and giving the jab to children, and calling out those that said it was safe in both those cohorts. I also wrote 5 letters to allow people to go and visit dying relatives abroad or sick relatives. And that led to me being struck off. So I kind of accepted that. I've gotten used to the idea. The plan was always really to hand my licence back if that happened, and if the opposite happened, if I won. So I wouldn't have been back in the NHS as it currently is. Halloween, I get a knock on the door. Thought it was trick-or-treaters. Took some sweets out, but then I found a chap with an envelope that I needed to sign for, and it was a letter from the DBS. Now, for those who don't know, the DBS is the sort of newly reformed Criminal Records Bureau check. So if you go for a new employment somewhere, you check to see if they've got any criminal convictions. So it's essentially a list for criminals. So they're basically telling me that due to my stroke off reasons, the GMC were duty bound to forward that information to DBS and for them to assess putting me on the barred list for vulnerable adults and children. Yesterday, I received a letter. That's the day before yesterday, actually. Time flies when you're sat in bed crying all day. But yeah, they put me on the list. Got the letter here. I'll just read a bit. Thank you for sending us the information for us to consider. We have considered all of your information and decided that it is wholly appropriate and proportionate to include you in the adults and children's barred list. Basically tells me if I work with any of those 2 groups that I'm subject to a £5,000 fine and or custodial sentence, and that anyone else who employs me with children or adults that are vulnerable. And by the way, the DBS say that anyone seeking health advice is vulnerable. So if you come and ask me about fungal nail infection treatments over the counter, you're vulnerable.
This should terrify everyone. If I didn't know any better, it seems like the Third Reich is back in power. Like, think about how dangerous this is. A doctor who's giving his medical opinion about the jab on children and pregnant women, and he loses his license to practice, even though what he said is correcting misinformation that is online about these vaccines. Now think about the chilling effect that this is going to have on medical professionals in the UK who see something that is just not right, that the government is forcing onto its people, and can't say anything. Out of fear, the government will take away their livelihood, meaning their license to practice, as well as possibly jail them. Is any doctor going to take that chance? Most likely not. A great example of this is this trans ideology that's being forced onto these children and mutilating them. You think any doctor in the UK is going to push back and challenge the government for saying that there's only 2 genders, male and female? Definitely not. Look at what happened to Graham Linehan. He talked about it this week in Congress. This is why censorship is so dangerous. And while I talk about it relentlessly on this channel, I don't know if it's because people are not interested or believe that it's happening because it hasn't happened to them, or if it's really because YouTube has been suppressing this channel and making sure that people don't see how they have been in collusion with these governments to do this. I mean, maybe it's both, but the only way that this is going to get out is reliant upon us, because I'm not counting on YouTube to recommend my videos anymore. I'm not counting on them to promote the channel. I really have to depend on you guys. So if you could help the kid out, share this video with one person, and then ask them to go ahead and share it with one person, and so forth. This is the only way that we're going to get the awareness that we need, because we know that the mainstream media is not going to talk about it. We have to accept the fact that the media is controlled by these globalists, these demons that have been doing a lot of harm that people are now waking up to as a result of these files. With this week's revelations from the files, there's no longer any room for denial. The royal family are fully implicated in this destruction and evil. The royal brand, right now, in my eyes, is nothing but a sham. King Charles has forsaken the church for these globalist demons. I refuse to tiptoe around the atrocious behavior by these people. I think it's important to remind everybody of the company that this family keeps. Here's David Icke on Redacted, giving some insight on the royal family's relationships with known PD files.
It turns out that procurer of children for the rich and famous, Jimmy Savile, inner circle member of the British royal family, was a great mate and associate of Ted Heath. Who was he also a great friend of? Margaret Thatcher. And the Margaret Thatcher cabinet in the 1990s, there were lots of revelations about the pedophilic nature of some members of her cabinet, well, significant members of her cabinet. And of course, the lid was put on because you've got the cult that is orchestrating the pedophilia and orchestrating the Satanism, but it's also controlling the political and administrative levels. It's also controlling the media. And therefore, it not only has the ability to orchestrate what happens, it has the ability to cover it up and make sure it never comes out. And so what you have is the media will ridicule, or it will dismiss, or it won't even bother reporting or investigating these things. And so many times I've come across people, politicians and such, who have sought to follow up reports of satanic activity and pedophile activity in their area of influence, who've had it shut down and have it shut down by the police. Now, this is another point. It's well known now, and has been for a long time, that the police knew what Savile was doing. They knew that he was a mega pedophile, but he was never collared for it. Never collared for it because of his connections. So you had this guy who was a disc jockey in the 60s, who was allowed to be a mega pedophile and procurer of children for the rich and famous right to the end of his life. Long after his media career ended, he had houses all over the place and massive cars and Bentleys with no perceivable, seeable source of income, because he was procuring children for the rich and famous. But the police never touched him. Now, there is the special branch in the police. There is the Royal Protection Unit in the police that directly interact with the British royal family. They would have known what the police knew of what Savile was doing. You think the royal family didn't know? Of course they knew. And so as these connections constantly are able to be made, you have the Epstein connection to Prince Andrew, massive, and you then have Prince Charles, who's now taken the title of Prince Andrew away in a damage limitation exercise. Maybe there'll be more sanctions as a result of this, the latest Epstein drop. And he's like, oh no, Prince Andrew is bringing terrible things on the British royal family. He's been dispatched to a long way from London now to a house in the middle of bloody nowhere in Norfolk to try to, get him out of the public eye. He doesn't do royal events anymore. He hasn't done for a long time because he was ostracized. But the guy doing the ostracizing was a close mate of Jimmy Savile.
Right, King Charles.
All those years, decades.
Right,
Well,
the
can I ask you,
hypocrisy.
David, you saw...
Known in the public arena, and the pictures exist. Now, the guy who brought him into the inner circle of the British royal family, Lord Mountbatten, who was a close associate of Jimmy Savile, hence he brought him in. He's known as the mentor of Prince Philip and Prince Charles. So it all kind of connects, and no media organization asked the royal families, the royal family, the obvious question: what is this pedophile doing in your inner bosom since the 1960s? One other thing, finally, on Savile. This lady, this friend of Diana, told me that Savile was into pedophilia on a mega scale. Yeah, it turned out to be true. She told me that he was into Satanism, turned out to be true. And she also told me that he was into necrophilia. He liked sex with dead bodies. Now, Jimmy Savile was famous in Britain for doing charity work. It was one of his fronts. And one of the things he did was volunteer, ongoing over a long period of time, as a porter in a hospital in Leeds in the north of England. Why? Well, we now know it gave him access to the mortuary. So, you know, and because Savile was so kind of famous, and other reasons too in the background, of course, the politicians loved him and wanted to be photographed with him. And, oh, yeah, Jimmy, such a good guy. And that's how he turned out to be. And so, again, you have the public face and you have the real face.
Epstein wasn't just Andrew's buddy. This dirty, nasty network touched the institution. And King Charles's silence of latest bombshells does not cover up decades of scandal that show a clear pattern. Protect the crown, ignore the rot, claim no accountability. Rinse, repeat. I'm sure there's going to be a few of you that are going to tell me to worry about what's going on in my country. Fair enough. You know, I can do that. But just remember, you guys do not have freedom of speech. So when shit is really hitting the fan in the UK, you're going to have nobody that's going to be able to talk about it. I do not serve this king, and I have every right to criticize the lack of action that I am witnessing from across the pond, especially when a member of the king's family is over here trying to impose the same thing. And I agree with this post from this ex-user, Benuwine, where they write, I'm sorry, but what's the point of the king if, when the government of the day and the prime minister is committing absolute atrocities and harming our country, if he can't step in and dissolve parliament? By convention, the king acts only on the advice of the prime minister. But even if that prime minister is purposely damaging the country and harming its citizens, how can the monarchy not do anything? Exactly. What's the point then? Bare minimum, recognize that the grooming of these British girls, as well as the pedophiles running around harming children, is wrong and against Christian values. I don't think that's too radical to step up and say it needs to stop. And I don't want to hear the nonsense about how King Charles is not supposed to be involved in anything political. This is not political. This is just being a good human being. I think enough time has passed to see that King Charles does whatever he wants, okay? He didn't do anything about Harry and Meghan for a reason. We know now that Europe was involved with interfering with our elections as well as our First Amendment, meddling and undermining exactly what Harry and Meghan were sent here to do. And if you think that the royal family didn't have an idea about what they were coming over here to do, then take your head out of your ass, because they knew. Now, the final thought that I will leave you here with is that just because you don't see things happening, I know that it might be a little frustrating right now because we haven't seen any arrests and we're not seeing people being brought to justice. Just because you don't see things happening doesn't mean that nothing is happening behind the scenes. And this little insight here is exactly what I have been telling you all along. I told you, keep the faith. Watch this space. Justice is coming.
And Jordan, for holding this, and congratulations to the team that put the report together. It really confirms
all of our worst suspicions about what was happening with Europe and the influence that they were having on U.S. speech. I wanted to ask specifically if you've considered help to Wyoming and New Hampshire with this Granite Act. This is the framework that would strip sovereign immunity from foreign governments for censorship-related activities. It would also prohibit the U.S. from enforcing any such orders and enable private lawsuits against foreign entities that are engaging in censorship. It sounded as though U.S. Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy, Sarah Rogers, said that was in the works.
Will your government then take legal action against Ofcom if they try and overreach in the way you've described?
Well, there's already formal action proposed. There is a bill before the House called the Granite Act that would amend an existing statute to clarify that as a matter of American public policy, any penalties imposed by Ofcom are unenforceable against American companies. So our legislature will likely consider that, and will certainly consider other options if indeed the British government insists upon trying to nullify the First Amendment on American soil with respect to American companies.
And Congressman Darrell Issa appears to have mentioned it during your recent hearings.
If we begin a process of sanctioning whatever it takes, even against our best friends in Europe, in order to say you cannot be prosecuted in another country, to enforce the First Amendment.
Can you describe what the thinking is and whether you and your colleagues are interested in moving forward with something like that? And if not, then what specific legislative and other measures you can take to protect Americans and our right to free speech?
We're definitely looking at that. And I should have said this at the front end. Michael, thank you for all the work you've done. You've been tremendous in exposing what's going on. We appreciate that. And all of you on the call for covering this issue. But yeah, because there's always, what is the remedy for the harm? You want something like that. Now, in the broad sense, and I mentioned this earlier, it's the White House and the Trump administration can use this as part of what they negotiate when it comes to trade talks. And people want to trade with the United States in our huge market, of course. We all understand that. So that's one of them. But there's also the specific remedy if you were harmed or they're doing all the terms that it's shadow banning someone's content. Michael, you have firsthand experience in some of this area. What's the remedy? So we are definitely looking at that. We had bills we passed before, but the specific remedy you're talking about, we're taking a good look at that and seeing if there's something we can do.
The last question will be from Benedict Smith from The Telegraph. He said his mic's not working, but I'm going to read out his question, which states, the report's conclusion talks about legislative solutions to counter attacks on free speech. Could you support visa bans on the British government officials over incidences like the treatment of Graham Linehan? And what other levers can you pull here?
You want to come to the United States, you want to hang out in the United States, you want to vacation in the United States, then the State Department would say, sorry, you've been involved in censoring speech in American speech and involved in censorship. We're not granting the visa. So that is one of the ways you can apply the pressure. We're looking at every possible route, negotiations when it comes to trade talks, visas. Is there other remedies like Michael talked about? We're looking at all that.
Such a fraud.